Hello everyone, my name is Arvin. I am a digital comic artist and illustrator from Italy, and welcome to my panel, How to Paint Light and Shadow in Digital Art. So for this particular panel, we're gonna go through a few steps on how to basically paint shadows in Photoshop. I use Photoshop. This can be done in pretty much any digital program or traditionally as well, actually. There's no restraint with the type of advice that I'm going to give to the medium. So you can pretty much use this for any type of artwork. And I really hope this helps with your day-to-day creation. Stay creative and let's start. So for first part of our segment, we're going to start with the very basics. So exactly how do we define a shadow? How do we paint a shadow? Let's start with something that you've probably seen a million times before. Let's make it a million and one. The circle. So why do people show this? This is super helpful for basic understanding of what a shadow is and how shadows behave on a simple object. Because most characters, for example, furries, or it can be pretty much anything, they can be synthesized in simple shapes like circles or cubes or cylinders or pretty much any basic shapes. So if we know how shadows behave on simple shapes, we can then translate them to more complex shapes. So the circle. Let's establish a light source for this circle. Let's say the light source is coming from the upper left, something like this, right? Let's paint our little sun. And establishing a light source early on is very important. You never want to shade randomly on your paintings, never, because it's going to look very flat in the end if you just place shadows randomly. So for our very first example, let's choose a very simple light source. First of all, the basic color of the sphere here, this blue that I used, is called the local color. A local color is the color of an object that is not affected by light or shadow. So it's pretty much the base color. We call it local color. And we use this simply to start our paintings. It can be pretty much any color. So if our light source is from the upper left, classically the shadow is going to be this nice crescent on the bottom right of the sphere. And you can immediately tell, I'm going to add a little bit of a highlight as well, you can immediately tell here that the edge of this shadow is soft. It's pretty blurred because the sphere, being round, doesn't have any hard edges, and so the shadow just rolls off of it. And aside from the highlight, oops, sorry about that. Aside from the highlight, which is this very nice clear area here, the edge of a shadow has a very cool name. It's called a terminator. And the terminator is literally the difference, the edge between light and dark. And it's very important to know where the terminator is on shadows when you want to shade, because the edge needs to be fairly defined. You need to decide where the edge is soft or hard. It makes a world of a difference later on, and I will show you a different example of how that comes into play. So once we place our shadow, this is pretty much it. We're done, right? Well, there are different types of shadows affecting the same object at the same time. So let me actually just add this here, a cast shadow. So basically this shadow that the object casts onto another surface, in this case the ground. But cast shadows can be cast onto anything. For example, if you're drawing a head of a character, the head is going to cast a shadow on top of the, say, the neck, for example. And this contributes a lot to making the object more believable, more 3D, more placed in space, because it looks like it's interacting with the environment around it. So it's very important to use cast shadows on your drawings when you're painting like this. So never forget about this. And because of cast shadows, so the edge between the object and the cast shadow, this one, this very little area of darker shadow here, this is called an occlusion shadow. Occlusion shadows occur between two objects that are so close together, almost touching each other, that light cannot reach. So basically, it's any nook and cranny, any corner in a character's model, for example, or in this case, the corner between the sphere and the ground is gonna cast an occlusion shadow. And again, this works together with cast shadows to make the object more believable. Look at the difference if the shadow wasn't there. It kind of looks like the sphere is floating, right? So this shadows, it's small, but it's very important. Never forget about this. And if you really want to make the sphere more immersed in its environment, right now there's not really much going on in the background. It's just a flat color. But for example, if this sphere was in this background, it would certainly have, you see here, some bounce light going on. Bounce light is the light reflected from the environment onto the object. I know it's kind of weird to wrap your head around it, but once you figure out how this works, it's really helpful to make your character or your object look more 3D when you're shading. So see how the environment here is sort of a beige color here, this light brown color. If we imagine the background to have this color, some of the light that, where's the sun? Okay. Some of the light that's coming from the upper left, right here, this part here is absorbed pretty much directly because we have, this, let me erase all of this. We have this part of the sphere pretty much absorbing most of the light because it's directly facing it. Some of it, right, it stops right here, and this is where the shadow starts. So actually this cast shadow is going to be even longer than the one I drew. And then once the light hits the ground, what's it going to do? It's not going to, get absorbed by the ground. Some of it actually is, but a lot of it is going to bounce back because that's what light does. Light bounces. It doesn't immediately get absorbed, especially on, different types of material. There are materials that, bounce light very much. For example, metals or mirrors. So this light here is going to go back onto the sphere, and it's gonna illuminate it in the shady part. So this is shadow here, but it's gonna be a little lighter than, for example, the shadow that's right here, because this side is exposed to some of the light that comes from the ground. So it's much easier when you just observe it and you do it than explaining it. It's a really simple concept, but it can really make your sphere look more immersed in the background. And actually, here, that's even better. And as a finishing touch, we can add a little bit of a shine here to make the surface more reflective. But this is, it depends on the type of material the sphere is made of. I'm not gonna delve too much into that right now. But see, this is what I was talking about before. A sphere doesn't have any corners, so everything here is a sort of a soft-edged shadow. But for example, we also can have hard shadow, hard edges. For example, a cube. And a cube behaves pretty much the same way as a sphere, except the edges are very defined. Say here, here's our shadow. So same thing, the light is coming from the upper left, same as in the sphere, right? Right here. So we got our shadow, we got our cast shadow. You can see it right here, cast shadow, and terminator. The terminator, which is again the edge between the light and dark areas, the edge between the highlights and the shadows. See how sharp it is. Look at this. This is very defined. Compare it to the sphere. Look how soft-edged the terminator of the sphere is. So edges are important. Edges can let you construct, for example, a character's face in a very precise and realistic way. For example, the eyes of any character, really, they're spheres. So they're going to have softer edges than, for example, the nose or the cheekbones. Cheekbones have this very usually hard, uh, you know, hard shape that immediately catches light and shadow and casts a very, very distinct shadow. So having control of the edges is very important, and that's what we're going to do in our example a little later on. But let's continue with the cube. The highlight also will have very sharp edges. This side is the side most exposed to the light source, which you can see here. But some of this side will also catch some shadow and some light in a very subtle way. So it's not directly facing the light source, but it's still not exactly opposing it. So it's gonna have some highlight and some shadow on it. And again, hard edges, very sharp, very defined edges. Once again, bounce light. This is bounce light. Light coming back from the environment onto the cube. And again, look how more 3D the cube immediately looks, just with this addition. The occlusion shadow, which is right here in the corner between the cast shadow and the furthest part of the cube that's not facing the light. You can see right here. And once again, a little bit of highlight. And notice how the highlight serves to, once again, define the edge of this cube. It sits along the edge of it and creates an even sharper profile to this. So this is pretty much our basic understanding of shadows. And again, this knowledge can be used on pretty much any medium. I just happen to work digitally. So let's apply this knowledge to an example in art. So here we are. Say hello to my character Africa. She's an African leopard, protagonist of my story Africa, and she's gonna be our example for today. We're talking about shadows. So how do we go about shading animals? Well, by applying pretty much everything that we talked about so far. So mostly edges and different types of shadows. We're going to see how muscles, for example, can have sharper or softer edges with shadows. And what we're going to do is we're going to consider this character as a 3D realistic object. How are we going to do that? Well, first of all, you can see that Africa's design is very busy. She's got a lot of spots and a lot of markings. So you know what? Let's hide all of them for now. We're gonna take them back later. We're gonna just sit with a line art and with a base color, with a local color. And from here, how are we gonna go about it? First of all, we have to consider this character in a 3D way. So how do we do that? Well, the easiest way is to observe. Observing nature and animals is going to give you a lot of understanding on how things work. So, for example, in her case, what I drew is a mesh. And basically, I made sure to respect the musculature and the edges of the animals. I looked up lots of pictures, for example, right now of leopards, and I created this nice 3D map of how the edges behave on this character. So, for example, all the edges facing the same way, say the nose here, the upper part of the muzzle, the upper part of the cheekbone, and the upper part of the eyebrow. They're all facing the same plane. You see that? So if a light source is going to be here, for example, all of these areas here, they're going to have the same lighting because they're all facing directly the light source. And we're going to see that in a second. And not only that, but look at the edges. See how the edge of the muzzle is rounded here. Sorry about that. It's got this very nice round shape because muzzles have more of a rounder shape. instead look at the cheekbone. It's got this very sharp, almost square edge here. It's not exactly a square, but you can see how much more, you know, dramatic this change is. And in some parts of the body, this roundness and this squareness is even more apparent. And you can infer all of this by observing. So never get tired of looking up references of what the animal actually looks like to know exactly which muscles cast sharp or soft edges. So we have our mesh here. So what do we do with it? Well, once again, establishing a light source from the upper left, for example, we can try and paint, you know, some highlights, for example, here. Oops, sorry about that. So let's start from there. Here's our mesh, and here's a new layer. I'm just gonna paint, for example, like what I was talking about before. This area being completely facing the light is gonna be in highlight here. Bit of a soft edge over here. In here, the edge is going to be even softer, look. Exactly because of this movement. Sharp edges here. And again, this will need adjusting later. It's not definitive, but look immediately how 3D the face is going to start looking. Look. This is going to be in shadow because it faces away from the light source. See that this plane is facing this other way. Oops, I cannot draw there. This plane is facing this other way, while this plane is facing this way. So this is going to be in light, this is going to be in shadow. And here, the eyes, as I said, they're two spheres and they bulge outward at this point, because this part here is going to be in shadow because it's covered by the eyebrow. This part is going to be in light. Same here. And actually this eye is going to be slightly more highlighted because it's closer to the light source. This one, some of the part of the muzzle is actually going to cover. We're talking cast shadow here. The muzzle casts a shadow onto the eye and makes the highlight less, you know, prominent. And again, this brow is going to be almost entirely in light because it's facing the light source. It's going to have a you know, softer edges here, a softer edge here. And again, this plane also faces the light source. And so we can pretty much do this for the entire body. Look how immediate. Let's remove the mesh. Look how immediate the effect is. We are creating sort of a 3D look for this leopard just by you know, calculating which edge is hard and which edge is soft. And so after we do this for the entire body, we're going to end up with something like this. Look, I'm going to remove the mesh. Look what happens. Character pops and it looks more 3D than it did a second ago. With, without. Oops, sorry. With and without. Look at the difference here. And some of the edges have kind of gotten lost because some of the edges need some refining. For example, here the edge could be a little softer. Same here because it's rounded. Look at this. For example, here, this muscle is harder shaped. So it's going to have a harder edge. Same here. Here, it's going to be a little more rounded. This is a cheek. So it's going to need some adjusting for sure. But look how the mesh helps with creating a 3D look for our character. And this can be done with pretty much any light source in any situation. So the mesh is very important. Take time to study your characters, to study your animals, to make sure that what you draw is realistic and therefore more believable when you actually paint it. So let's have an example with an with an actual shadow. So once again, we're going to establish a light source. This time let's go with something from the right, since we've been to the left all this time. Oops, why is it not working? Since we've been to the left all this time, let's establish a light source to the right. Okay, so what I like to do is, here, look. I create a new layer on top of my colors. These will all be, Africa's colors. For now, we're hiding them, but I like to keep them there and use a new layer on top of everything. So what I like to do is I like to create a multiply layer. So multiply is your typical shading layer, because what it does is it darkens the colors. For example, right now I'm using a light blue. Look what happens. If I set it to normal, it's light blue. If I set it to multiply, it's going to darken the color beneath. And this is true for all the markings. You can see here, they're all darker. See? So this is the color we're going to use for our shadows right now. Let me erase it. Let's grab a nice hot brush, and we're going to create soft edges here in a second. And we're going to start painting. So the light source, once again, is coming from the upper right. And let's make it actually behind Africa. So kind of a backlight, if you will. So we're going to consider the face to be sort of a circle, right? And we can also use our mesh to help ourselves. So all the areas that do not directly face the light, they're going to be in shadow here. All of this area, without a doubt, because it's not facing the light. Light is coming from here, right here. So all of this immediately in shadow. And now we're going to see exactly where the shadow extends. Not only that, but the face also casts a shadow. See what I was talking about before? The face will cast a shadow on the neck, right here. So this area is going to be completely in shadow, without a doubt. So this part of the ear is going to be in light because it directly faces it. But this other part, so the fur, for example, coming from the ear, it's going to have a little bit of shadow going on. And same here. Because you always got to think of the head as a 3D object. Not only that, but the ear is going to cast a shadow onto the face. So this part's going to be in shadow. Going to think of 3D objects going, through the entire body, not just a part of it. The whole body interacts with each other, and this is exactly how we make it look realistic. Again, this part here, still shadow, so we can extend some of the shadow here because the light is coming from behind, so this part here is going to be more in shadow. And actually this part here as well, look, it's going to be a softer edge because the spline changes, less dramatically. It's going to be in shadow. Okay, so what else? Well, you can see here this muscle creates a dip in the side of the neck. This is called the sternocleidomastoid, aka the neck muscle. It's a mouthful of a name, and it's a very prominent muscle, especially in cats because they have very strong necks. So this creates a very nice shadow, and look how rounded it is. You know what that means? This is a soft edge. So let's soften it a little bit. You can also erase from your shadow to soften them even more. Look. Same here, the dip between the legs, also in shadow, especially from this light source. So this part here in shadow. And this edge formed by the muscle also in shadow. So this one all the way down to pretty much the middle of this muscle here. Because this is where the plane turns. So this part is still kind of facing toward the light source, but this part is already changing. Look, this plane is changing and it's going like this. Oops. Why is it not creating? Oh, okay, sorry about that. This plane is going this way. So as it turns, the shadow is going to turn with it. Right here. And actually, because this muscle here bulges out a little bit, a tiny fraction of it is going to actually be in light. Very, very small fraction of it. Just like this. Because this plane is kind of turning again. You can see it here. It goes like this, and then, oops, I'm on erase mode. Just like this, and then again, doing this on a smaller scale. So this little part here that's wrapping around, it's still visible enough for it to be in light. And once again, this part here is almost completely in shadow because it's facing away from the light source. It's going to have a little bit of a rim along the edge here, look, because this plane is curving very gently, so it's going to be slightly in highlight, but not by much. And like this, just like that, we got our, our shadow. And actually, now that I look at it, the shadow cast by the head is going to be a little more dramatic, because if you look at the light source, it's coming from even further behind. So we're going to just correct it a little bit. It takes some trial and error for sure. Now look at this. Now let's remove the mesh and look what we got. So again, some shadows can need a little bit of tweaking, but look. And let's add the markings again. And we have a shadow coming from the upper right, from behind the character, no less. So this can be done with pretty much any light direction. So always create your mesh. Where is it? Create your mesh and then go wild with it. This is going to be helpful in pretty much any lighting situation, from the left, from the right, from behind, anywhere. And one last consideration to make about shading is that you can use light to narrate. So especially this goes especially with color and use of values, but you can use light and shadow to tell a story or to make areas of your paintings more prominent. Here are some examples from my work. I wanted to bring the focus to the leopard's eyes. So what did I do? I basically just cast a shadow onto its muzzle, so this whole part is in shadow, and your eyes are going to be less attracted to it, guiding you to the area in light, which is usually where the observer's eyes go. So if you want something to be prominent in your painting, cast a light on it. It's basically like shining a spotlight on top of it. So here, eyes in focus. Same here. In this case, for example, I wanted the eyes to be gleaming, so I cast a shadow around it, which also makes the character look menacing, because usually light from the bottom up it's your typical villain lighting, and it's also fire, and the overall color palette of this painting is red, so danger. There's a lot going on when dissecting use of color and lighting in art. And so once again, I wanted the eyes to be in focus, so I cast a shadow all around them to make them stand out more. And here, a similar thing. So once again, in this case, I wanted to bring out the edges of this koi wolf. And so what I do, I literally just added light to pretty much the whole silhouette and shaded the entire body so that you can only see the edge of it. And finally, here's this flying creature here. Once again, then lightning is the most prominent thing alongside the character because both are very bright against a very dark background. And in order to make the edges more prominent, what I do is I created these blue rim lights right here. You know, once again to remark the edge of the paws basically and the leg to make it stand out more, because otherwise this leg would have been dark, like see here, dark black gray, which mingles a lot with the clouds around it, and it wouldn't have been very visible. So in order to make it pop, what I do is I simply just cast the light on top of it, and the sound pops out. Whoops. So that's about all the time we got for today. I hope you enjoyed it and it was helpful. And once again, my name is Arvin. I write comics and draw illustrations. You can find me on these websites. And most importantly, I appreciate your support on Patreon. It's really helping me out and it enables me to keep creating. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!